Hello. Hello.
Hi, Jake.
How are you?
I feel like I got hit by a train, but I'm fine.
All right. I guess while we're waiting for the others, do you have any questions about yesterday's content?
Hey, how's it going?
Hello? So I was just asking while we wait for the others to join, if anybody has any questions about the content that we covered yesterday.
Oh, um, so maybe you can help me. My issue is like when you start going through the code, I get lost.
Oh, okay.
Is that just is the only fix to that like me going through code, yeah, or like
Yeah.
rewatching the videos and trying to follow along kind of thing?
I mean, I think it gets like it's just I don't know. I mean, I think the main thing is to practice, as much as possible. Best thing is to practice writing code, um, but yeah, because that's the thing that's gonna like create the neural pathways, new neural
Uh-huh.
pathways in your brain. Because
Right.
it's a lot like learning a foreign language. Um, uh, it's similar in the sense that it is a language. It's more structured, and you also have to like practice it a lot in order to get it. Because yeah, just watching it, it can be hard to decipher. So maybe a good thing to do would be to like go back and like try to build the same application like the one that we built in class, but like do it on your own. And when you get stuck, you can refer to the code as an example, um, to get you unstuck. The other, possibly the other thing that you might want to do, um, is is you can go through and read the code on GitHub, and if you have like any specific questions about it, you can actually like leave. You can comment on the code on GitHub. Like on any line in GitHub, you can actually go through and like comment about it, and then that'll get to me, and I'll be able to, you know, um, like if you have questions about what specific things in the code do, then I can go through and reply and help clarify. Oh, and that reminds me. So for office hours, does Sunday morning work for everybody? Like I was thinking Sunday morning, 9 a.m. to noon, I could be available. Um, Obviously remote, but available on Slack and Zoom to I mean basically to do what we're going to do today, which is uh, today's going to be kind of a freestyle where we just work um, you know on your capstone projects is like an all day lab. Um, and I kind of want to orient it around testing, but really, like we can use this as an opportunity to just, you know, work on any specific problems um, that you're encountering with your capstones, or anything that might be bugging you, or anything that might be confusing you, and we can just like go through and just use it as like a collaborative coding session. I mean, obviously everybody's going to be working on their own projects, but I figured we could just do like a round robin, and you know, if you have specific, yeah, questions or problems that you've been encountering or things that you want to work on, um, then we can talk about that, and we could even do some collaborative coding on it. if that would be helpful. Really anything to kind of get you unstuck and productive and moving forward and make it a productive 3 hours for you. But if you don't have anything, anything like that, then we can just talk about talk about testing and how to test your your application. Let's see, we're 4 minutes in, but we don't have a quorum yet. So let's give it another minute or two, let people dive in. But anyway, does that format sound like a good one? I mean, what do you think that do people have problems or issues they would like, to help, like that they'd like to discuss in a group setting related to the capstone?
I'm sorry, I had to step away for a minute. Did you all decide on a time? I heard you suggest 9 to 12.
Yeah, that was what I was proposing. I don't think I got any feedback yet.
Okay, because I had scheduled I was trying to schedule a one-on-one with one of the other instructors, and I was trying for 10, but and he's only available until 12 in the afternoon, but I can do it with him on another day if everybody wants to do 9 to 12.
Well, I mean, the office hours are optional.
Okay.
So you don't have to. It's just if people have, specific questions or things they'd like to work on or to get some help, I'll just, make myself available at that time. But I also want to choose a time which is going to be accessible to people, and not, because
And otherwise, that works out fine because I'm only with him for 1 hour.
Okay.
That still gives me 3 hours to touch base with you if I have a question about something.
Yeah, that's great.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Yep. Okay, I think we're getting close to a quorum. Let's see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Yeah, so I think we can pretty much start. Yeah, I'll repeat what we've discussed so far. So the first order of business was scheduling office hours. I was proposing Sunday from 9 a.m. to 12 p.m. Unless that doesn't work for people. Let me know right now, and I can look at choosing a different time. But you can also message me on Slack. Although it'd probably be better to just if it doesn't work, it'd probably be better to let me know right now, because everybody's here and we can do this scheduling in real time.
What day? 9 to 12? I apologize, I missed it. What day?
Sunday. This Sunday.
Sunday works for me. That's perfectly fine.
Okay. And again, this is optional. This is just if you have questions that you want to ask or need help with your capstone, or anything related to the course, really. I'll just make sure that I'm available at that time and near my computer. So you can just reach out. Okay, so we'll do Sunday from 9 to 12. I'll make sure that I'm available for office hours. So the other thing that we were talking about was the format for today's course. So I wanted to make this an all-day lab where we have an opportunity to work on your capstones. I'd like to orient it around testing, so we could talk about how to test your capstone projects. But I'd also like to open it up to any topic really related to your capstone. So if there are specific problems that you've encountered, or questions that you have, or like anything, really anything that that might be helpful to discuss in this setting, then we can work on that here during over the next 3 hours. And then hopefully we can use this time so that everybody can sort of is like a collaborative coding session where we can kind of advance and get some stuff done. So I figured the format could be we'd go in a round robin, which is to say, just talk to every person in the class and just kind of loop that way. If you have specific stuff that you want to talk about related to your capstone, including things that are coding related, where we could kind of throw some code up on the screen and work on it together, then that's fine. And if not, then we can just talk about testing in relation to your project and how we could apply the concepts from this week to testing your project. So does that sound good to everybody? I figured it'd be, I figured it'd be good to have some time to work on your capstones specifically, really focus on that.
Sounds good to me.
Sounds good.
Okay, cool. So I'm gonna just go in the order in which people are listed on my screen, on my zoom.us screen. It's pretty much a random order. So I'm just gonna start calling on people. So Elizabeth.
Oh gosh.
I mean, I just noticed that the order also changes depending on who's speaking.
Oh, awesome! I'm out.
No. You're still up. I took screenshots, so I'm gonna go on that.
I'm not at testing, and I'm struggling this week because I'm not there.
Yeah, I think that's true for everybody. Like, I don't think anybody is at a phase where they're testing their project.
This week has been a little overwhelming.
Yeah.
To think about testing, and I'm trying to redo 13 hours of HTML, CSS, and React, and
yeah, you guys have absorbed a lot of new material in a very short amount of time. So I think that's totally understandable. So to layer testing in on top of that is definitely a lot. So yeah, we don't have to talk about that specifically, but let's see. So I'm just pulling up my notes from the demo day. It was the weather and migraine API, right?
Migraine basher predictor or something. Max suggested I get the code done and the API would come after that. Mm-hmm. But I loved your weather API. I am using Open Weather, mm-hmm. or want to use Open Weather, or that's the one I was familiarizing myself with, but yours looks even more awesome, actually.
Yeah, so there are, so just on the subject of weather APIs, there are a couple, and most of them are, commercial. So they're what's called metered. So you pay per use. So for example, Wonderground, which is owned by the Weather Network.
Yeah, they have an app, don't they?
They do have an app, and they also have an API. It's a very good API. Like they have, it's a good app. They have a solid network of weather stations that basically volunteer to give them their data.
Wow.
Yeah, and
They
so it's
Hmm.
so it's a really good API, really good data, but it becomes expensive.
Right.
So Open Weather API, I'm not sure about, but that's one good thing about NOAA. The NOAA API is that because it's a government API, it's free to use, which is nice. So yeah.
Also, and I don't want to get ahead of myself. Was it yesterday you talked about geocoding?
Yes, geocoding is another API that would be that you'll probably need.
Yeah,
So
go ahead.
no, you go ahead.
No, I know how to use. It used to be called Quantum. Is it GIS or QGIS or?
Yeah, I know. So for everybody, like a GIS is a geographic information system, and it's basically like mapping
Everything.
and mapping software. Yeah.
Which I just learned from Max actually, because I didn't know what to call it. Was it because I guess the particular one I use, I had to do a lot of things with I had to reinstall an old version of Python just to get it to work. But it's open source, and they claim, at least QGIS, they want everybody to use and play with their. So they say, I haven't seen any hidden costs, but they do have a geocoding portion of it. This seems like I might be getting ahead of myself, but I do know how to use GIS software.
That's interesting. So
interesting in that it was really confusing, or it made no sense, or.
Well, I don't know about QGIS. Yeah, I actually don't know. Let's see, free and open source cross-platform desktop geographic information system. Okay, so it's desktop software. But
I think they allow you to build
like a server, like a version that can run on a server.
Yeah. Maybe because they have mobile. They have all kinds of mobile capabilities.
Yeah, that would make sense. Yeah, because, but that's interesting. So if they support geocoding, so again, to recap, geocoding is when you've got like the name of a place, like, the name of a town, for example, like Syracuse, New York, or an address, like, 233 Wall Street, something like that. And you want to convert that into latitude and longitude coordinates, more or less. And then you've got reverse geocoding, which is where you have your latitude and longitude coordinates, and you want to convert that to something like a street address. So both of these are pretty commonly used features for a number of different. Apps. Yeah, sure, dating apps.
Dating apps.
Yeah. Although I guess if you're using Tinder, it's probably not geocoding anything, because it's just, you can just take two, honestly, like if you think about how Tinder works, they don't need to geocode anything, because both apps are going to use the GPS on the phone in order to look up the latitude and longitude coordinates for each of those users. And then they just have to find all the users who are within a particular radius of you know, the of other users, of the person using the app. And that's something that doesn't require geocoding to look up. That's just a query to a database that supports like these kind of GIS queries, these kind of geographic information system queries. So for example, there's, I think you guys have taken a look at PostgreSQL.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. So PostgreSQL has an extension called PostGIS, which allows you to basically store latitude and longitude coordinates in the database, and then run these sort of queries like this one, where you would say, okay, given some latitude and longitude, find all of the rows that have a latitude and longitude that's within a particular radius of this given latitude and longitude. And they let you run those queries. They let you specify them as SQL. And then it's just a SQL query like any other. And of course that's much better because, you know, usually when you're geocoding stuff, you have to, you know, usually you're calling a third party service. Like for example, Google Maps. Google offers a geocoding service because they use it in Maps, and they've made it available for people to use. So a lot of people use Google's geocoding service, but you know, it's also metered. You have to pay for it. It's not very expensive, but if you're doing it a lot, then it can become expensive. If you're just doing a database query, it's relatively much cheaper. Like, you know, because you own your database more or less, and you're not paying for every query. I mean, you are a little bit. You're paying in terms of the, you know, cost of renting the CPU. You're paying for the CPU time, but you're not. You know, it's much cheaper compared to doing a geocoding. So a call to a geocoding service. Yeah.
Can you tell me the difference, or if there is one, between geotagging, geocoding, geolocating?
Yeah, just off the top of my head, I think geotagging is where you have some data, and then you want to attach geographic data to that data, right? So let's say you have like a user field in the database, or say you have a building, you know, the name of a building, or you have a database with some records in it. I believe geotagging is when you would attach geographic information to that data. So if you have a user, you would say, okay, here's the location of that user. Excuse me. Geolocating would be, I mean, I think it would be like retrieving the geographic information for a thing, right? So if you have a user and they have an app and you geolocate them, that means that you would be essentially using the GPS or potentially other sensors to triangulate their position and retrieve their latitude and longitude coordinates. That's geolocating. Once you've geolocated them, you probably want to geotag them, which would be storing that geolocated position in a database.
Let's say if they open the app and they geolocate themselves in a way, me.
Yep.
It's also, are they also geotagging themselves in that location?
No, you would be responsible, your application would be responsible for geotagging them, I guess. Where basically you would take that, I mean, it's similar to the example that we were working on yesterday, where, you know, it's looking up, it's using, like you could use the geolocation web browser API to geolocate them, which is to say get their current position, current geographic position. And then you would basically do a call, an API call to your server's API to receive that information, their latitude and longitude, and then save it to your database. We could actually do a very short, simple example of that, if that's helpful. Maybe not right now, but we could do it on Sunday and build out, just a little thing, which, a little example, which retrieves that information, sends it to a service, and then saves it to a database.
Quick question, and then I'll move on. I promise. Just when I open WeatherBug,
yeah,
it tells me I'm in Syracuse, New York.
What's WeatherBug? Is it a website?
Like Wonder Weather, whatever that one is.
What? Oh, Wonderground?
Wonderground is also, WeatherBug is another app.
Okay.
Weather. When I open it, it says you're in Syracuse.
Right.
So is their service or their server? Who's doing what with the geolocating? I'm in a position and I open the app, so it just GPSs?
Yes, that is correct. So it's using your phone's location services, which uses some sensors that are on the phone. Because the location services might not just use GPS, it can also triangulate you based on your location to cell towers or your proximity to like known access points, like Wi-Fi access points. There are a whole bunch of things that it can use to figure out your position. So it's using your phone's location services, but it's probably using GPS. GPS is
okay. I understand now. I'm sorry.
Oh no, that's fine. I mean, this is all about Q&A. So I mean, these are good questions. I don't know if anybody else is doing stuff that's related to geolocating people. Or
I am.
Okay, well, good. That's good. So this is a relevant discussion, I think.
Yes, it is.
Yeah. So what's happening is you open the app, and it's using your phone's location services to look up your latitude and longitude. And then it sends your latitude and longitude to the server, and then the server is using whatever weather API it's using. Maybe it keeps an internal database, or maybe it's calling out to a third party. But basically, the app is sending sending your latitude and longitude to the server. The server uses that to look up the weather for your location. So like I was talking about, where it queries the database, like you can query the database given a latitude and longitude, basically a GIS query. It's the server would be doing that. So it takes the latitude and longitude, which you send it, and then it uses that to query the database to retrieve the weather for your current position. And then it sends that data back to the app, and then the app renders it. And that's what's happening in the app. Does that make sense? Or
yeah, especially because the app tells me where the nearest, weather tower.
Yeah, exactly.
And the school that it's at. I've got 3 that are nearby and can whatever. So no, yes, it makes lots of sense, and more sense than yesterday. So thank you.
Oh yeah, you're welcome. I'll just verify. Like, I'm just going to write out. So I'm posting everything in CIC student resources. So I just want to make sure that the flow is clear. So I'm just going to write out one more time here that phone geolocates user from location services, GPS, etc. 2, app makes a probably a REST API call. You guys are going to use REST API. So a REST API call to the server to post the lat/lon coordinates. 3, server makes a GIS SQL query to the GIS-enabled database to retrieve weather for that location. For server returns response, returns query results to the user as a response to the app. 5 app renders response visually. Tag Dana Elizabeth. Okay, done. Great. So let's, yeah, and yeah, you're welcome. And we can work on that potentially on Sunday during office hours if that would be helpful. So let's continue in the round robin, which is again in an arbitrary order based on how Zoom is showing me everybody's names at the top of my screen. So next up we have Dakir.
Okay. Similar to hello.
Yeah. Hi. Yeah.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah. Similar to Elizabeth, I don't have anything I can really test now.
Yeah.
But I can tell you about the app and some ways and maybe you can tell me about some ways I could be testing. I can tell you my thoughts on what I could be testing.
Yeah. That sounds good.
So it's an online gallery. The basics of it is a gallery that will be categorized by the type of picture, and there will also be like a shopping cart component to it. So I know that testing the shopping cart and making sure that when they click it, it goes into it, and that if they pay, that whole thing is,
Yes.
working.
Yes. Yeah. Absolutely.
That.
So no, you continue. I'll have some comments in a minute.
Well, and so the two parts I thought about testing was the shopping cart part, and then the making sure that all the images and stuff are coming correctly.
Got it.
Those are the two tests that I can think of.
Yeah, great. That makes sense. So okay. So about that. So for item 1, the shopping cart, there's an interesting. Okay, so testing shopping carts is particularly interesting because it's it's definitely helpful to test them with mocks so that you're just testing the UI and it doesn't actually go to the back end, because you just want to make sure that your UI works. But it is also helpful to test them end to end because you actually want to make sure that people, when they're using your application, can buy things. But at the same time, this can be tricky because you're dealing with like real money and real credit card numbers, and they have to process the credit card, and
Right.
and that can make things complicated. So that leads me to an interesting anecdote, which I think you might be helpful for you. If you would like to, does anybody listen to the podcast Reply All? Does anybody know that podcast?
No, I've never heard of it.
Okay.
Yeah, I've never heard of it.
Reply All.
Reply All, yeah. It's one of those what's the name of the company? Gimlet. It's one of those Gimlet media podcasts. Anyway, it's a podcast about the internet, more or less. Stories about that are related to the internet and technology and things like that. It's a really good one. But they have an episode where there's a mystery that they're attempting to solve, which is that Domino's Pizza has been receiving orders that are just for a Coke. It's just like one Coca-Cola in a can. And those orders are always for the same name. The person, it's always the same person's name on these orders. And they'll do an order for a Coke, and I believe they either cancel them right after, or maybe they don't. But anyway, that episode, I'd recommend that you give that a listen, because it's about, well, a question comes up as to, whether this is, the Domino's Pizza engineering team testing the website, testing their ordering system. Spoiler alert, it probably isn't, but it's somebody testing something. But anyway, so that occurred to me as something that might be useful to your project, is you have one item, which is a very small dollar amount, and but it's a real item, that people can buy if they want to. But you take a low value item, and you have a test credit card, and you're actually able to use real data, like real live values for everything, in order to test your live production site to make sure that everything is working.
Okay.
So that's so anyway, that's an interesting, testing shopping carts and payment systems is kind of an interesting problem to solve in that way. And that was one data point that I thought might be useful to you. Let me see if I can find the episode. Reply all Domino's Pizza Coke. I should probably do it. Anyway, while I look that up, the other regarding the other thing that you mentioned, so making sure that all the images are coming in correctly, that's actually something that you'll be able to test very well programmatically. So you'll be able to write tests for that, because in the DOM, you can actually test to make sure that images are loading correctly. So that's called an image onload handler. So I'm just going to send you some resources here in the Slack.
Thank you.
Yeah, and basically your test script is going to, like, one, fetch all the images on the page once the page has finished loading. And then two, attach onload handlers to all the images. And then three, return success if images finish, if onload handler fires for all images within a particular window of time, e.g. 30 seconds. So that would be one way to do it. And that's something that you could test quite well without any particular complicated, like, you wouldn't have to compare it to screenshots or anything like that, and you'd be able to run it against the production site. So that's basically the logic that you would implement in your test script. Yeah, I think that works. What did Alice say? Oh, thank you, Alice. link to the Domino's Pizza reply all episode. Thanks. I was trying to look that up. Great. Okay, cool. So unless unless you have any other questions, maybe we can move on to the next person.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm all set. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. Okay. Next person on my screen is Caitlin.
Hi.
Hello.
Okay. Sorry. Sorry. Okay. So I have like random questions, I guess. Like, some of them are kind of dumb, maybe. I don't know. I have a couple questions about testing, but most of them are just like, I'm kind of like, I haven't coded any JavaScript for my project yet. One of the questions, I guess one thing I'm wondering is like, I don't know if I'm going to use React. I kind of just like my basic like file structure that I already have. I want to try it, but like, I don't want to like set my heart on it. I just, whatever. So we'll see what happens with it. If it comes out great, then cool, but like, So like, if I'm not using that, like, how do you recommend coding all the JavaScript? Like separate files, like some stuff like inline, like what do you think is the best way to do like all the fetch requests and stuff? Like there's just so many different options for that.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, the thing about JavaScript is that there are like 1,000 different ways to do everything. So it's sort of like, so what you're describing generally falls under the category of what people are now calling vanilla JavaScript, which basically means JavaScript without any particular framework.
Yeah.
And this has become so like no, this is no, I'm not shaking my head because I'm exasperated or anything by the decision not to use a framework. I'm exasperated because there are like 1,000 different ways to do things, and people are like often very oriented around frameworks. Now, the lack of using a framework has been kind of marketed as like a different kind of framework. Like this website that I just sent on the Slack it says Vanilla.js is a fast, lightweight, cross-platform framework for building incredibly powerful JavaScript applications. Mm-hmm. But it's just, I don't know. They're being a little bit sarcastic because Vanilla.js is not actually it's just it's basically just using regular DOM APIs that are available in the browser. I mean, the thing. Okay, so a little bit of history. Back in around the year 2000, Netscape was competing with Internet Explorer for market share. And eventually, Internet Explorer won, and Netscape as a company died. Yeah. And Netscape became Mozilla Firefox. Like they open sourced the Netscape code base, parts of it, and that became Firefox. But because there was so much like competition, all the browser vendors were trying to add like special features and different ways to do things, and there wasn't a lot of standardization. So like developing applications that worked across different browsers was a lot harder than it is today. Now there's sort of a basic feature set which works pretty consistently across all the browsers. Not only that, but many web browsers, like the browser landscape is becoming more of a monoculture. And what I mean by that is like many web browsers now are just versions of Chrome. Like the Chrome open source code base is this thing called Blink. It used to be called WebKit. Like it came from one that was called WebKit. Before that, it was KHTML. I'm going to post all this in the Slack right now. This is the lineage: KHTML to WebKit to Blink. Okay, so anyway, now at this point, the latest Internet Explorer browser and the latest version of Opera. I don't know if you guys know about Opera, but that used to be something totally separate. Both of those guys are now, their code base is built on Blink. They just decided that it was too expensive for them to try to build their own browser from scratch and do all of that work. And they'd rather just let Google do it and just base their browser on the Chrome's code base. So all of that is to say that like now there's a much more stable baseline for developing applications using the browser's built-in APIs. So a lot of the reason why you would use a framework is no longer there. Like a lot of people used to use jQuery because it made it, easier to do all of this basic DOM manipulation and Ajax stuff. And now you don't really need it because
frameworks were developed to like help accommodate for all the different browsers, but like now it's not really necessary because of
that's one reason. The other thing that happened was around 2006, 7, 8. Is that right? No, that's a little early still. Around, I think around 2010, 2011, there was this proliferation of frameworks for like basically binding data. And so what I mean by that is like, okay, previously if you were building an application with jQuery, for example, let's say you've got some state that you want to keep track of, right? Like for example, in our weather app, the state was the weather, like the current weather. So if you were building an app in jQuery, a lot of the time you would just store that state information in the DOM, like in your, like in the actual like HTML elements in your web page. And that, but it, everybody was encountering this problem where it was like, okay, the user updates a value here and I want to see that change reflected over here. And now I have to build a bunch of plumbing to like connect the state to the rendering and to the view and the view back to the state. And
I see.
This is a problem that was that is not unique to web front end development. It's not unique to the browser, and it's something that people had to solve before web browsers existed. And so they created patterns to do this, to develop user interfaces so that your state was effectively decoupled from the way the application was rendered, right? Mm-hmm. Another way to describe this is your model is separate from your view, right? And you have a little controller in the center, which is trying to keep these things in sync, synchronize your model to your view, mm-hmm. where the model is the state and the view is the way the state is rendered. A lot of the time, this is like really necessary because like if you have, for example, like multiple views, so if you've got like, 2 different views on the same data, then you need a pattern like this to keep everything in sync. This pattern is called MVC, or Model View Controller, but it's a little bit of a vague pattern because it says that there should be a model and there should be a view and there should be a controller, but it doesn't really say how these things are meant to talk to each other. And so I think around 2010, like a dozen different frameworks were developed in order to effectively solve this problem in the browser. And like there were the most popular one became AngularJS. There are some others which are still used a little bit. Like Backbone was a popular one. Like I remember Airbnb's website was all done in Backbone. And Ember.js, and I don't know, but there were like 12 of them. And but Angular became the popular one, Angular 1. And then after that, after basically the Angular development team was like, we're going to start again for Angular 2, and it's going to be completely different. And then in the time between when they were developing, switching from Angular 1 to Angular 2, people started to use React more, and React became the more popular one and started to take Angular's market share. But anyway, so this is a very long explanation to describe like why frameworks exist and why you might want to use one. But you're certainly not obliged to. And for many applications, I don't know, it's probably, I mean, it's never, I don't know, like when is it the wrong choice to use a framework? I don't know. It just, it's the wrong choice when you don't want to do it, I guess. If that's your instinct, then you don't, you know. And plus there's a lot of utility to like learning how to use DOM, just using regular browser APIs. Like that's a very good thing to learn how to use because the frameworks don't do everything for you. Like there's a lot of stuff where you really just want to just use the DOM. Yeah. So anyway, so if you're developing an application where you're not using framework, what is the best? Like, how do you do it, basically? And I think the answer is, I mean, there are a lot of tools which might benefit you in terms of how, like, to answer your question about how to organize your code. So one question that you'll need to answer is about whether you want to use ES6 and ES6 modules or any kind of a module system.
Okay.
Because if you're using ES6 and ES6 modules, then you need to use probably Babel, which is the thing that lets you compile your ES6 modules into just regular JavaScript. Because, although that's not strictly true, because Chrome now and browsers that are based on Chrome natively support ES6 modules. So if your application was Chrome only, you could use ES6 modules in your browser, and you could organize your files that way, just using ES6 modules. That basically allows you to separate your files out into, separate your modules out into different files, and then use, an import statement in order to, pull it into your main module. Now, because if you're not using a system like that, well, the alternative is, I mean, then you have a couple of different alternatives, but they're, basically the choice is between, do you use a module system or no module system? And if you use a module system, which module system do you use? Because they all have slightly different benefits. So if you don't use a module system, then basically you're going to be adding script tags to your HTML page, and you're probably going to be using something like what's called the Crockford JavaScript module pattern. This is let's see, Crockford JavaScript module pattern. Yeah, this is the one. Back from 2007. I remember this blog post. Um, so this is the way that you can, create modules which sort of nicely encapsulate your data, and but it doesn't give you a way to like import and export objects between your different JavaScript files. To do that, like the only way that you can, um, share data between your different scripts is through a global, is through the global namespace. And the way that people used to solve this problem back when, vanilla JS, back before there was a module system to use, was they would create one like global object and they'd put everything in that object. So like, for example, they would say, just like how like jQuery creates like a global $sign object, and everything. And if you're writing a jQuery plugin, you just do like, I can't remember the interface, but you're referencing like jQuery.plugin.my plugin name, something like that. That's how people would do, that's basically what they do, is they'd use something like the module pattern, and then they'd have a global object with a name that they recognized. And then they would add properties on that global object, and they'd communicate through that global object. So that's how you do it without a module system. So if you're doing it with a module system, then you have to decide like which module system to use. And you can basically use ES6 modules, and then you're using Babel, or you can use CommonJS modules, and then you're using a system like Browserify to combine them, or you can use AMD modules, and then you're using require.js, and these are your various options that you can do. I would probably recommend using Babel and ES6 modules because it seems to be the most future-proof for browser development. Like you're definitely going to encounter it, even if you're not doing anything with React. And to begin, you can also avoid using Babel. Like you don't actually have to do it if you're developing your application in Chrome. So you can basically probably start by, using ES6 modules, develop your application in Chrome, get everything working, and then once you're like, once you have everything working and you want to support other browsers, if you want to support other browsers, then you can add in the then you can add in Babel so that you can build your code to work in other browsers.
Yeah, because like, for this capstone project, I guess it's not like a huge deal, but like, I was thinking about like if I'm just like hard coding all this JavaScript without framework, and then like you said, like a lot of the browsers are based on Chrome or like versions of Chrome, and then like if that somehow changes at some point, which I'm sure it will eventually, then like that renders problems for like the stuff that I've already coded if I don't have like a backup plan, kind of like if it's not compatible at some point, then I'd have to go back and like redo stuff, which is like yeah.
Well,
I don't know if that's like possible, but like it just seems like it could be an issue.
Well, there's one thing to keep in mind, which is that ECMAScript modules, these ES6 modules, are part of a standard now, like the next version of JavaScript, the next standard version of JavaScript. And that standard was developed by a consortium of browser vendors, which means that it's probably going to be well supported, for a long time.
Yeah.
So as long as you're using ES6 modules, it should probably continue to work.
Okay. I mean, I'm gonna have to.
Yeah, and as for the other ones, they're just not, well, AMD works in the browser as is. It just, uses a library called require.js in order to run, but that's going to continue to work. And Browserify, like common JS modules, they need to be compiled using a tool like Browserify, but they compile down to a form that's also standards compliant. So all of this stuff is standards compliant. It's either the next generation, the future standard, or it's the existing standards, but it's all standards compliant. So whatever solution you choose, it'll probably continue to work.
Okay. And then I guess I mean, I'm gonna be making there are a few different APIs that I'm gonna have to use for my project.
Right.
And I'm also gonna have to, I know Max is gonna cover off tomorrow, but or next week, but I'm also gonna have to store user data in a database with passwords and usernames and stuff, and then also somehow connect the database to the API when I have to
right.
addresses and stuff. So I'm just trying to think of the most concise way to do things without repeating everything over and over and over again.
Right. So I'm glad you brought this up because I mean, no, well, you guys for most of your applications, for many of your applications, you're going to need auth, right? You're going to need user authentication and authorization, basically user accounts and all of this stuff. So Max is going to cover that next week. On the one hand, it's very good to know how to write a system like that, and it's a good exercise to do it. And I don't want to deprive you all of that experience, because it's very educational to write a system like that. On the other hand, it's such a common feature of applications that there exist now third-party services that essentially solve that problem for you. And I'm going to describe two of them right now. And it's up to you, I think, as to whether you decide to use a third-party service to manage that for you. Okay, so the first one is Firebase. I think maybe did you guys talk about Firebase last week?
No, but Max, I think, is going to talk about it next week.
Okay, that's super. Okay, so Firebase does a lot of stuff for you. And one thing that I believe it does is handle user accounts. It also acts as a database with real-time features, so you can put your data in there, and you can have it, synchronized between browsers. It does a lot of stuff. So so that might be one potential way for you to manage your user accounts is by using Firebase. Mm-hmm. Just as another alternative, so that you know that it's been solved a couple of times, is now Amazon has a thing for managing user accounts. They call it AWS Cognito. If you guys are going to be, I don't think you guys are covering AWS and cloud stuff in this course, but anyway, for your benefit, for completeness, I'm just going to post this here. It also gives you a way to handle user account sign up, password reset, things like that. When I used it, it was pretty rough, but I think maybe it's gotten better.
We used AWS for database.
Oh, for the database part?
Yeah. With
okay.
Gus, I know Max tried to use it for collaborative coding. That was awkward. It's just an awkward UI, honestly, all around. So.
Yeah, honestly, AWS is an awkward. Well, I don't know. This session's being recorded. I don't want to disparage them. But
no, it just did. It was clunky. It was
yeah.
not. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's kind of a clunky product, but everybody uses it because it's cheap and reliable.
Yeah.
So, but it can be a pain to use. So, but yeah, potentially those of you who need auth can use a third-party service, and then you won't have to write that yourselves.
I feel like there's like a web of I have this like vision of like a spider web in my head of like all the connections that need to be made.
Yes. Well, yeah. I mean, you know, people have said that you know, being a software engineer, you know, in this era of cloud services and cloud computing, it's a lot more like collage, you know, or you're just connecting and integrating different services together, you know, different existing services.
Yeah.
Although I don't really know how new that really is, but I guess I can see why it feels that way. It's because, like, you know, there are so many different like APIs that are available now,
Oh my God.
you know, that it just feels like, you know, the the space of possible options is really limitless. But, and you know, there are like services that have risen up to try to take advantage of that or make that easier. Like, I mean, for you know, non-technical users, there's if this then that, right? Do you guys know if this then that?
Like logic, like just.
There's a website called If This Then That. It's basically a way of allowing you to, like, without doing any coding, to mash up different online services. So, like, for example, if you, like, you know, it'll create like a Google Doc whenever, you know, somebody posts on Instagram or something like that. It's a way of like mashing up these different services without doing any coding. But the one that's oriented more toward programmers is this one called Zapier, um, and um, and it's like an if this then that, but for technical users. Um, but the idea behind them is the same, which is that you have this web of services, um, and you need, you know, and the work that you're doing is like integrating and connecting them together in meaningful ways. And that's so, you know, you're not wrong. In fact, I'd say you're right about that. Yeah, and it kind of goes with like Tim Berners-Lee. You guys know Tim Berners-Lee? So he's the creator of the World Wide Web. And like he's the inventor of it. He invented it back in 2000. Sorry, that's way off. He invented the web back in like 1990, something like that. He wrote the first web browser and described how it should work. And then he used it to connect the computers together on the network at CERN, the lab outside of Geneva, Switzerland, and then gave the software away for free, and more universities installed it. And and that's how the that's how the web got created. But yeah, this idea that you know, more data and more APIs are becoming available is I think correct. And then Tim Berners-Lee, the creator of the web, is in favor of that, and he wants more of that. This kind of open linked data on the web. So anyway, that's does that answer your question?
Yeah, no, it's good. I just, yeah. So I need to, like, you know, redraw it again for like the 800th time. So yeah, that's it. I guess like that's pretty much all I have. I'm gonna like take an entire hour of like I guess, one quick thing I think would be helpful. Can you which testing program do you find to be your favorite? And then I don't know if it was Selenium or I don't quite understand where to write the tests or I'm just kind of confused about that.
Yeah. Again, it depends on what you're testing. So
test your entire application HTML, CSS, and JavaScript and everything, or do you only test the JavaScript portions?
Yeah, well, that's right. So if you're only testing the JavaScript portions, so let's say that you've written, some logic, let's say you've written a component,
Mm-hmm.
just let's say you've just got some function, and it's implemented some algorithm, some discrete, definable chunk of logic, which is complex, relatively complex,
Mm-hmm.
and you want to test it to make sure it's doing the right thing. So for that, you're going to write unit tests, which I did not talk about very much this week. But for that, and let's say that you're using common JS modules. For that, I really like this library called Node Unit, which I used on day one. I think it's deprecated. It's deprecated. Yeah, it's definitely deprecated. But but I don't know. It's very simple and easy to use, and so I like that. The one that it seems like most people like for doing testing in the browser is
Mhm.
this one called Jest, and that is probably the one that you should focus your attention on in terms of how to write those tests.
Okay.
And in terms of where you put the tests when you're writing tests with Jest,
Yeah.
it's you put it alongside your modules, the module that you're testing, inside of a directory called __test. And there are some examples, simple examples of this in the code that I posted on GitHub. Let's see, lab, I'm doing lesson 2 lab reference. Oops, just a moment. Yeah, so there's a simple example posted here. But basically you put your test inside a directory called __test,
Mhm.
which lives alongside your module, and you put your testing logic in there. And that's, I only showed that in relation to snapshot testing, but it doesn't have to be snapshot testing. Jest has a lot of different, Jest, you can do unit testing with Jest. It has this thing called a matcher,
Mm-hmm.
where you basically write, you can write stuff like this. It says, 2 plus 2 is 4. You expect 2 plus 2 dot to be 4. Very, simple, straightforward kind of testing logic. And you can use, ES6 to import the module that you want to test. And then you basically can call, let's say it's a function. Let's say you're testing a function. You can say import, my function from my test module, my module. You can write something like that, and then you can basically, write a test like expect my function some data to be some expected value, output value. That's basically the idea behind testing, is that you want to take some known input and some expected output, and then compare that to actual output. And that's the core idea behind testing. So And then all the different like, testing frameworks and things that are available to facilitate that, they're all, like a little bit different in their conventions. By conventions, I mean like folder structure and where you put things, and like the APIs differ a little bit, but but the core concept is really simple. It's just this: you've got some known input and an output that you expect, and you want to call the function, and you want to give it the known input, and then you want to capture the output, the actual output, and you want to compare the actual output to the expected output, and that's basically testing in a nutshell. And you just do that a lot. Everything else is are just particulars.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's kind of unit testing. But if what you're developing is not a discrete chunk of logic inside of a function so much, instead it's more of like a UI component, then snapshot testing would be a better choice for that. And if you just want to test, like a quick way to test your application and like stepping through every page, and you just want to capture that quickly, like testing a workflow as you step through your application, then you could use Selenium for that.
Okay.
Yeah, and Selenium, as we've seen, is a little bit different. In that case, you're not writing code as much as, at least if you're using their IDE, you're not writing code as much as you are stepping through using their tool.
Yeah.
Yep.
You just like run through all your code using their interface, right? And then it like kind of do it for you.
Yeah, and in that case, you're sort of running through like a test script, simulating user actions.
Yeah.
And then the thing that you want to test, like the expected output, is the stuff that's on the web page, right? So you actually like dive into the web page,
right,
look at a particular element and say, does that element have some value that I expect it to have?
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah. So, and you don't have to use just one of these things. You can use potentially all of them. I mean,
well,
yeah, because you're using it to test like your application at different levels.
Oh yeah. So, yeah. Cool. Perfect.
Okay.
I think I'm all set.
Great.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so next person on my screen is Karen.
Hi, I'm here.
Hello.
Sorry, I was leaving the kitchen because everybody's making noise.
That's fine.
I'm not really sure what to even ask at this point because I'm still getting everything together.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, with mine, capstone for like running everything down, a matter of, I guess I don't even know where to start with like testing.
Mm-hmm.
I think my biggest probably thing that I'm going to need to make sure that it works is in where they are going. I'm going to have them drop a pin where their arrow is in just like a picture of what the scoring looks like. So I did talk to Max a little bit. Probably the best, I think he suggested the best way is vectors to create I guess like a copy of that photo in order to be able to drop the pins.
Can you remind me? It was a reporting system for City of Syracuse. Was that what it was?
Nope.
Sorry. Which one was it?
Mine is the 3D archery scoring
Oh, 3D archery scoring. Right, I got it. Okay, let's see. So I'm just remembering what that one looked like. Let's see. And you were going to drop a pin to show where the arrow was.
There's a lot to it because it's they'll create a round each time they go to shoot. A new round will be created, and they'll pick however many targets they're going to shoot in that round. Sometimes it's 30, sometimes it's 40, sometimes it's 70, sometimes it's 100, depending on what the shoot entails.
Yep.
So for each target, when they go to record their score, there's also a picture so that they can drop a pin to show like where it landed within the scoring rings.
Yeah. Okay. So it sounds to me like, I mean, like basically you're, there's going to be like a mathematical representation of like the geometry of where the pin is, which is to say like there's going to be, that pin's going to have like an XY coordinate
Yes.
on your target.
Yes.
And so like if we think about, you know, this idea of testing where you've got some, you want to compare some known input to an actual, some known input and a expected output to an actual output, you know, you could imagine writing a test function where you actually, just point of clarification, when you drop the pin on the target, is the thing that you want to test what the score is? Like you want to translate from the position on the target to a score. Is that right?
I was going to do that. The only thing that I am concerned about with that is if they touch, because some of the circles actually like touch and they and they're different scores. If they put the pin on there and it says, oh, you know, this scored a 12, but actually it was the 11, you know, like they'll have the ability to override that in it, but I don't know if that's something that's just too complex right now. And I just want to be able to drop a pin in a general area and have them choose the score.
Yeah, because I mean, you know, this idea of like, you know, going from like some geometric coordinates to some score, like that's something that, you know, is something that, like that's one of those things where you've got, like that's a chunk of discrete logic that you'd want to test, you know?
I mean, for right now anyway, that seems like really complex.
Yeah.
And it, you know, like if I get most of it, I would imagine, you know, like I think anyway, that eventually I could change it so that it could do that.
Yeah. Then it sounds like what you'd want to test. Like right now, it sounds like you just have the, you know, you just want to test the UI logic, which is basically if the user taps on the target, then you're going to drop that pin where they tap, you know, and it's going to show that pin, right? Like that's basically what you want to test right now.
Yeah, because I think if I get into the, like, I mean, eventually I would like to get to like where they drop the pin, it automatically records their score. But
Yep.
I think that's something I need to do down the road.
Yep.
Like, I don't need to have that up and running for my capstone, but I do want to be able to have them just like drop the pin in a general area of where their arrow is, and then they can choose, because sometimes, I mean, those lines are really close, and if they happen to hit on that where their arrow hits there and they tap on it and it records the wrong score, then they're going to be like, well, that's not what I got, and I don't want to do that yet.
Right. Well, I think Selenium would work well for this, because if you think about it, it'll load up the web page, and then you can simulate the user tap, right? And then you can check that like from that tap, you can check the position of that tap, and then Selenium can go in and check to make sure that there is a blue pin at the position where you tapped. So Selenium would work for this. And then, yeah, we never got to the to actually showing how to simulate user events with React. And also, I don't know if you're planning on using React.
Yes.
Oh, you are? Okay. All right. So
eventually down the road, like as I develop this more, I will probably end up using React Native.
Right. Oh, to do a native application.
Yeah, to try and get it into like the iTunes Store or Google Play Store.
Yeah, that's cool. And has Max talked to you guys about progressive web applications? I think he did, right?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Great. So that's an option too. But progressive web applications don't go in the App Store. But there's another. This might be a bit of a tangent. This doesn't have to do with testing, but has anybody talked to you about like Cordova or PhoneGap? Do you guys know about that?
Max did mention Cordova to me.
Right. It's pretty much the same thing. Cordova is just the open source version of PhoneGap. So what did Max mention about Cordova?
He just basically what he actually suggested that I do, which is I'm pretty sure this is how I'm going to end up doing it, is have it be a progressive web app for now.
Yeah.
And then eventually, when I get to the point where I want to like actually put it out there, he said Cordova would be an easy way for me to go.
That's right.
Or the React Native.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. Cordova would be a little easier because it's basically just a way of packaging up a web application into an app. Yeah. So that's a pretty, it basically just takes all of your HTML, CSS, JavaScript, like all those files, and puts it inside of an app container for different mobile platforms. So that can be a good solution for that. Yeah. So so that sounds good. So but to return to the issue of testing. Okay, so you're using React. It would probably be like what the lesson that I didn't finish yesterday, where we simulate some user behavior. Basically, jest plus snapshots plus the thing that we didn't finish with the simulating user behavior. That would be a good approach for testing that kind of UI logic. The advantage to using that over Selenium is that you don't it's a little faster and easier to run the test than it is to run the Selenium test on like a server, on like a continuous integration server. It's not necessarily faster to write the test that way, but it would be a good exercise to do it. And if it's I will plan to update the example that I posted on GitHub with an example of basically I'll post I'll update that example code so that you can use that as a reference. I don't think we'll have time to finish that lesson. So I won't be able to show you how to do that right now, but I could certainly update the example code for Sunday, and that might be something that would be useful. To recap, a quick, a way to write a really quick test would be to use Selenium and their IDE to, capture your clicks and make sure that it drops the pin. it would also be useful to write a test using React and Jest and the snapshot mechanism and the user simulation and all that stuff, because it'll be easier to run those things in a continuous integration context, so that it basically will run it every time you push your changes to GitHub.
Okay, great.
Yeah. Okay, cool.
Other than that, I don't think that I have everything else is pretty much would run for me, runs along the lines of other things that people have already talked about. So
Okay. Yeah, sounds good. All right. Yeah, thank you. Okay, next person on my screen is Catherine.
Yep. Okay. I think I'm along part of the same lines as Karen using Selenium ID. I actually tested it out, and a lot of what my results are going to end up being are going to be based on user clicks and what they choose as their answers. So I did a quick Selenium ID test just to see if I could, just to simulate, okay, if they choose A answers, A is going to be what comes up. But I haven't got it to quite work. I think it's because I'm not sure which, I used assert value, but I don't know if that was correct.
Yeah, that should work. If you get stuck with that, I can help you debug it. Yeah, so that's definitely one possible. Like, you could definitely use Selenium that way. It potentially means you're going to have like a lot of different Selenium tests that you're going to have to record and run, because probably you're going to have like a lot of different pathways through your application, right? Like a lot of different possible combinations, like survey combinations, that you're going to want to test. Is that right?
Yeah, well, the way that I have the quiz working is at the end, like it just counts how many A answers someone, how many B answers they select and how many C answers they select. And then it takes whatever has the most value and is going to return data based on that.
So you're describing a like basically an algorithm that translates the user's answers into some result, and depending on how sensitive that logic is, like if it's very important to your application to map those answers to that result in like a precise and consistent way, then that's a good candidate for unit testing, which is basically where you're going to test that function in isolation, and you test it on a bunch of different inputs, which in your application are going to be the survey results, survey questions, and then a bunch of different outputs, which is the survey result. So that would be a good case for unit testing in addition to Selenium, which is not to say that the Selenium testing isn't useful. Like, that's also useful, but you might want to test that algorithm in isolation, or at least it sounds that way. At least it sounds like that part of the application would be a good a good thing to unit test.
Okay.
But it also depends on whether the survey whether the survey needs to be precise. Maybe it doesn't. Maybe maybe it can or maybe you're still developing the algorithm as well. Like if you're still trying to sort of decide on the logic that maps the questions, or that maps people's responses to the results. If that's still being actively developed, then it might be good to wait to actually write the test for it. But anyway, the structure of those unit tests will basically be like, your expected input would be a set of answers that people have done to the survey, and the expected output would be some result. And then you can basically take those answers, send it into your function, get the actual output, and compare it to the expected output.
Okay. Yeah, because I think that I'm like everybody else. I don't think I'm at the state of like testing yet.
Yeah.
But I'm hoping that this weekend I get a lot done, and by Sunday maybe I can get help actually writing that test for that algorithm. So I do have something that basically works. It's just not connected to an actual like database or anything like that yet. So, and it's literally just like an empty arrays that kind of get updated as somebody clicks that ID A or C. So, but there are like when I demonstrated it, there was an issue because we selected tie for A's and B's, and it came up undetermined. So there are things that I am going to have to work through that like that happen.
So this is a great opportunity for that kind of test-driven development. So we didn't get a chance to talk about unit testing very much, but I have some slides here, which this might be a good opportunity for to show these slides. Yeah, I'm just going to show these slides. Okay, so let me share my screen. So the idea behind unit testing, again, you're just testing like some fundamental unit, some like piece of logic that you want to, and in JavaScript, that's probably going to be isolated inside of a function. So you've got some function which encapsulates some core logic, and you want to test, that some input that you give it matches some expected output. And but you really want to think about like there are three kinds of tests that you can do when you're unit testing. There's a test for success, test for failure, and test for sanity. So test for success would be, so like for example, if you have a function where you're adding two numbers together, like 1 + 1, you want to make sure that the expected output is 2. Test for failure is if you give it some weird input where it should fail, then you actually want to make sure that it fails in the way that you expect. So like, for example, if you were to like add 1 to a string, then your function might say, actually, this thing that you gave me is a string. I don't know what to do with this, and it might throw an error. And your test might check to make sure that the function threw an error. And then test for sanity is like, if you had two functions, one that added 2 numbers and one that subtracted 2 numbers, you said, add 1 + 1, and then, the subtracting one says subtract 1 - 1, then you would end up with the number 1. But you really want to think about your boundary conditions. There's a lot of text on these slides. Yeah, you really want to think about your boundary conditions. So like basically, like what is the range of possible inputs that the function could take, and in particular, you want to test the function at the beginning and end of those inputs, because that's where you might get weird behavior that you need to think about. Like, for example, there's, an integer of maximum size on on each system. Like there's a number that's the largest number that you can have, and you can't have a larger number than that. So what happens if you try to add 1 to that number? So that's the type of thing where you want to think about the edge cases in the behavior of these functions, and you want to think about the whole range of possible inputs, or the domain of possible inputs, and the range of possible outputs, and check these things around the edges. But it's helpful to, like, the reason why you might want to write your test first is because it's helpful to like reason about these behaviors, and then you can actually write tests to test these possible behaviors. And that way, it's like, it's a way of making sure that like that function is going to be very robust, because it's going to be tested against like, a meaningful sample of those inputs and outputs, especially around the edges. Does that make sense?
Kind of.
Like, yeah, I know it's a little bit abstract. We didn't cover unit testing very much. Yeah, I kind of thought that UI testing was going to be more relevant to what you guys were working on, but the core idea is that, like, you're testing some input and an expected output against the actual output, and that input that you're giving it, you want to think about the whole range of possible input values that your function might accept, and then the possible output values that it might return, and in particular think about all the edge cases around that. That's the basic idea behind unit testing. Yeah, we can dive into more detail about it potentially on Sunday at office hours, if that would be helpful. Yeah, and sort of figure out what would be the best way to unit test your like that particular algorithm in your capstone.
That sounds good.
Okay, great.
And on a plus note, I did this tutorial and it used prop types, and I kind of understood what they meant, but I'm glad that it got covered.
Oh, good. Yeah, prop types are useful. That's definitely one way of guaranteeing software quality. Yeah. Okay, next person I have on my screen is Dana.
Yay, finally.
Yeah, you're up.
Okay. So I am doing, I guess it is what you would call a progressive web app. Are you able to hear me okay?
Yes, I can hear you.
All right then. And I'm going to be, I guess I'm going to just follow the method for the dev environment that they put up on Slack, which was I guess it's the CERN, Sequelize, SE, what was E? Is E Express?
Probably Express.
Okay, React, and then the M.
And probably Node.
Okay, yep. Okay, so not M, but N.
I think so.
I thought it was SCRM, but it could be N. So anyways, so earlier today, I took the liberty of just setting up a fresh node environment, and I set up a local host at 8081 because I wanted to try to um, fetch information from the Central Bus API. And I think I'm a little ahead of myself, so just let me tell you what my capstone is supposed to be. I am trying to set up a better bus tracker application for people who want to catch the bus, for that the app to be able to use their current location to let them know the next time that the bus closest to them would be arriving.
Yeah.
To take them to their destination. And so I too will be using geolocation and geo-tracking and things of that nature. I already have a Google API key for that, and I've been playing around with that a little bit. I also have a Central Bus API key, and if you look in Slack, Jake, I've already sent that key to you. Because one of the things that I'm having trouble doing is accessing their endpoints. Things that I should be able to access are like bus route data, like the route list, the stops, route definitions, vehicle locations. So my biggest issue right now is I don't know if I'm doing the fetch call, the get call properly, or if my key has expired for whatever reason, and I didn't think that it would. So I'm hoping that I'll be able to have this resolved before tomorrow night.
So you said this was for the Centro Bus API?
Yes. So Centro. So I got in contact with Centro,
and
they gave me a key. Yes, Centro. They granted my request for a key to be able to tap into their database of information, multiple databases.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
I did a project at Hack Upstate a few years ago, which used Central Bus data, but they didn't. Well, they did have an API, but it wasn't documented.
Okay.
We had to reverse engineer it. So but it sounds like they've changed things to make it more accessible.
Yeah, which is a good thing. So if you want to revisit that project, I'm sure that they would grant you an API.
I was trying to find it on my GitHub, but it looks like I didn't post it, which is weird. But anyway, I think it would probably be obsolete at this point. This is probably back in like 2013.
Oh, a while ago.
Yeah, a while ago.
Okay, so all right, so let's see. So what I've done so far is, let's see. So I don't want to bother Central unless I know for sure that it's the API, and my process of elimination is flawed at this point. So I need help making a request.
Yeah.
And I tried to do it from within VS Code. And I also tried to do one using Postman, and I've been unsuccessful with both.
Okay, great. So let's see. So I see I've got some messages from you here on Slack.
Yeah.
Oh, interesting. Ithaca Transit Backend. Oh, great.
Yeah, because the Ithaca Transit has already built a really nice bus app, and they just recently made it available on Android. One of my complaints about trying to use them as a model when I first started this project is that at first it was only available on iOS devices, and I found out recently that they just made it available for Android. And so that's when I went into GitHub, and I've been able to download, I've been able to clone all of the code for their back end.
Great. So let me ask you this: like, is there documentation for the
Central?
For the Central API that
they've sent me a small 37-page booklet.
Oh, that's perfect. That's
that
perfect.
I'd be happy to
Yeah.
share with you.
Yeah. Can you post that to Slack?
Sure.
Okay, great.
Sure, I'd be happy to do that. Let me see. And let's see. I want to copy and paste what they gave me as an example of a request and an example of an expected response. So I'll go ahead and paste that into Slack first.
Great.
Let's see. I'll put it in CIC students, so if anybody else wants to take a look at it, they can. All right. Okay, it's there. And then as far as the booklet, they sent that to my email. So let's see. Do you want me to drag and drop the PDF? Okay.
Yep.
All right, one moment. I'm like, I recognize all of this language, but no JSON is being returned to me, so I don't.
Right.
Going on.
Well, it looks like that might be because I mean the API that you're requesting is the endpoint is the host is localhost 8080, which is your local server.
Right. I actually I set mine to 8081.
Right.
Yeah.
So that might so interesting.
So would I have to have that? And see, I really don't know where to begin with this. I thought that 8081 would be a good test environment, but my thinking is maybe they want me to actually have it like on the live site, the URL that I've already purchased for myself.
Well, so normally when you're invoking a third-party API, they provide an endpoint on their website, like one that they host.
Okay.
So normally it's not invoked through your server. I mean, I guess it could be, but it isn't usually necessary. It's not usually required to do that. Now, this might be a different situation where you have to run your own server. That server would be what you'd call a middleware that sits in between your client application.
They did say that it would need to be run on my own server, and I thought that localhost was me running from my computer. Like
yeah, it is.
Okay.
So that's consistent. It's just it's not it's not unheard of. It's just a little bit uncommon. So so they're asking you to run this this Node.js server, this Ithaca Transit backend server.
So the Ithaca Transit is just what I was using as a model to give me a clue as to where I should begin.
Okay.
And I know that for the sake of time, I'm going to have to scale down from what they've done. I just, at this point for today, I would just be satisfied knowing that I can make a request to the central endpoint to see if I can get some of the information that they have.
Right. Can you post that booklet?
Yes, I am trying to see where I saved it. One moment. Oh, I can go ahead and just add.
Yeah, that'll probably help.
All right then. So I'll put it on my desktop. Okay. Just give me 30 seconds and it'll be there, or less. Bus tracker. Okay, and it's called Bus Time API. All right, and I gotta go back to my Slack. Oh, okay. Your recorded screen is too big. I gotta, okay, here we go. Move you out of the way. Sorry, this is taking so long. I had a lot of windows open.
That's better.
All right. I think I have to bring this one down. There we go. And go back to Finder. All right, and now I should be able to drop it. Maybe I can just link to it. I'm having difficulty with drag and drop, so I'll try just uploading it.
Okay.
Okay, and I just hit the button to upload it, so
Okay.
oh, and there it is.
Super. Okay. Okay, just gonna take a quick look at this.
Okay. Slack is great. I thought it would kick the book out because it has so many pages. But when I looked at it, it didn't seem that intimidating. I recognized a lot of language and conventions in it that we've been using.
Mm-hmm.
I said, boy, it would be nice if I could just get this to work on my own, but I guess that was asking too much.
Yeah. I'm just going to share my screen so that people can see what I'm
Great.
looking at here.
Great.
Because, yeah, I mean, API exploration is one common developer task.
Okay.
So this is, I think, probably generally likely to be generally useful. So, so usually the first thing that I try to find is an API endpoint. And what's very interesting here is the fact that the API endpoint that they list is this localhost 8080, which again is, you know, surprising because normally it'll be something which is hosted on their server. But as you said, it sounds like they want you to run a middleware. So so the question is like, where like what is this middleware that we're supposed to run?
Right.
And because although I have an idea about what that might be. Now
we all have AWS accounts. I mean, it's something like that what they were looking for?
No. So what I think is happening here is this this API documentation they sent you is for a third party that sells transit systems.
Wow.
And so they sell it to like, you know, like public works departments like Centro, right? And then Centro basically takes the server, which this company Clever Devices sells them, and deploys it, you know, and manages it.
Oh, okay.
So that's why the endpoint in here doesn't mention Centro's endpoint, you know, but presumably Centro is running a server that implements the API that's described here.
Okay.
So we have to just discover what that is. And this kind of goes back to the reverse engineering work that we did back in 2012 or whatever it was. We're just gonna see if we can figure out what that endpoint is.
Cool.
And because they gave you a key, I think this is legal.
So we'll find out soon enough.
Yes. All right. So we're going to go into the network tab here. And we're going to find a bus route. Okay, select agency, Syracuse.
Syracuse.
And, oh, James and Westcott, a very nice bus stop. From campus, select stop. Yeah, I mean, I think any of these.
If you do, can you do like a Syracuse University bus stop? Because the thing about it is, I'm also thinking about testing, and so when you were talking about expected outcomes, I figured if I were going to do testing, it would be on a neighborhood that I was familiar with.
Sure. Let's see. Is there a...
Yeah, or even Westcott. Westcott would be good.
Yeah, Euclid and Westcott. Let's do that. No service is scheduled at this time. What time is it? Not even late. 7:30.
Yeah, 7:30. Yeah.
Let's see. Maybe we should just do the transit.
Oh, not
central.
Yeah. I was gonna say Nob Hill. That bus runs this time of night.
Okay. Sure.
Some of the SU buses might be like not working because there's no college. They like.
Oh, that's
right.
true. That's true.
How
about Brighton Ave, Ainsley Drive?
Oh, okay, we got something.
Oh, great, good.
Okay, so it looks like we've got a couple of calls here. We've got getStopPrediction.jsp and getStopsForRoute.jsp. Although none of these look exactly the same as what was described in the booklet. If we look at the booklet, it's got this thing called get RTI PI data feed, which gives me a little less confidence that that the website is using the same APIs as what are in the described in this booklet.
So now I get what Ryan was saying, because he took a look at it and he said that there were a lot of funky things that were going on, and it didn't really go into it at that time.
Yeah, I mean, this is definitely an API. You know, it's returning. It's got a key, and it's returning data in XML format. But it is. Oh, and it looks like it's live too. You can see it's refreshing every couple of seconds. So that's good. But yeah, no, it's different than what's described in the documentation. Let's try one more thing.
Okay.
Which is the I think it was a map. Trip planner, bus tracker. Well, anyway, their web server might be calling some API endpoint. But that would be, you know, we would need to look at their server in order to know what that is. Let's take a look at the other thing that you sent.
Okay.
Sorry, just a moment. I'm just going to go grab my charger. Just one moment, please.
Okay, no problem.
Okay. Plug this guy in. All right. Okay, so let's just take a look at Ithaca Bus Tracker.
Mm-hmm.
Let's go through their source code to see. I mean, well, I have a couple of questions, but let's see if we can find something related to this API. So
Okay.
let's search for bus time inside of their code base and
Mhm.
see if there's any reference. Nope, no reference to bus time. So I wonder what they are integrating with. Like it's possible that they have their API backend. This is for their API.
Mhm.
Oh, V1, V2. That's interesting.
Yeah, they have a few things going on in here. So I guess they have their, if I'm not mistaken, they have an iOS version going on. They have an Android, yeah, an iOS and an Android version going on.
It's a little unclear if the Ithaca Transit backend is designed to yeah, it's a little bit unclear if it's designed to integrate with this Centro API. All of this code is very generic. Route.
Yeah,
it just has one router that's for V2.
right. Well, you know, Ithaca is a totally different transit system. So I was just using their information as a model just to kind of give me a clue as to how much work might be involved in what I was trying to do. And
I see.
and then looking to see how I could scale it back, scale my project back so that it would be something manageable for me to, you know, still have a bit of a wow factor, but to come to some type of logical end for my capstone.
Right. But it doesn't look like it's designed to integrate with this Centro Bus Time API.
Right.
So there's this question of what is the Centro Bus Time endpoint. I wonder, and now I'm just thinking about whether Google might tell us something. Let's see if we can find something like this. Don't think this is particularly. Oh. What open data challenge is about?
So this does give me a bit more confidence in that maybe my API call was correct. I didn't realize all this other stuff was going on behind the scenes.
Well, yeah, it's like we're missing one critical piece of the puzzle, which is the endpoint.
Okay.
And it might be good to follow up with them and ask for what is the API endpoint for their bus time service. Because yeah, if you know that, then it seems like it should work. Unfortunately, it doesn't seem to be possible to figure out what that is just by looking at their website.
My plan B was going to be for me to create my own small database of endpoints and put in latitude and longitude information, and just design the front end around some information that I put together myself, based on the city streets, and go out and grab some central bus schedules.
Yeah. That you could definitely do. That's an alternative. But I mean, figuring out what their API is great.
Okay. I can send an email and ask.
Yeah, I think that would be the best thing.
Okay.
Yeah, it doesn't look like there's any documentation online about it.
Okay.
So yeah, if you can figure that out, I think it would probably be really helpful to a lot of people.
Okay. And I was thinking that if they don't supply me with the information, there's enough information in the Ithaca Transit app, a lot of geolocation information, the database information that they have for the bus schedules, the bus routes, that once I get the front end of it complete, I can just connect to their information, just to begin testing out everything, to give me a better feel for how mine is actually going to work. And then once I get the information that I need from Central, just to disconnect it from the Ithaca information and connect it to the Central information. But at least I have information thanks to Ithaca. Because they make all of their bus routes, the schedules, all of that is publicly available in their GitHub account.
That's pretty amazing.
Yeah. So Jesse and Jason gave me that tip months ago. And so I check in from time to time just to see how they're progressing with the app, because one of the things that I was going to have to do was to try to do an iOS simulator on my Mac, but now I don't have to do that now, because now they have an Android version. So happy for that.
Yeah, very nice.
Okay, but thank you. So I think that'll answer. I don't know if Alice is still connected. I did ask for a one-on-one session with her, and so if she's been listening in, she'll have a better idea of what direction we need to go in when we meet on Saturday. It's either Saturday or Sunday.
It was Saturday.
Saturday, okay.
And take a look. It says right on the webpage right here. If you're interested in developing apps or widgets with Central Bus Tracker, you can apply and gain access to the Central Bus Tracker API. Simply send us an email here. So it sounds like you're on the right track.
I did that already.
Yeah,
and they gave me the API key, but you said I need to do what? Get access to their server?
No, not get access to their server.
Their server.
You need the URL endpoint.
The URL endpoint. Okay, I'll write that down.
For their for their API.
Okay, that helps.
Okay, great.
All right, thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So let's see. Last but not least, Kelly.
Hi, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, cool. Let me tell you what's going on with my tax zone.
Yeah.
Okay, so I've actually made a pretty big change to it since Monday. My initial idea was to basically create a review aggregator for local businesses around Syracuse. But the ultimate goal is really to create a centralized location for sensory-friendly information, like, resources and things like that. So I think what I'm going to do instead is to actually create more of like a lightweight social media app where people can create posts and then like and comment, things like that. So that way it'll be a centralized place for that information without having to tie it specifically to businesses. That's kind of what I'm doing.
So sorry, you said a social media app where you create posts and then people can like and comment on those posts. And then you said centralized place for that information without specifically related to, and then it cut out a little bit. Related to what?
Oh, without having to relate that information to businesses.
Oh, okay. So just kind of like an open forum.
Yeah, more like that.
Got it. Cool.
Cool. So my question for you, I actually am using Firebase in my app.
Yeah.
And so I'm running Lint.
Yeah.
With it. But I don't remember exactly what Lint does.
Right.
If you wouldn't mind just like explaining that again.
Yeah. So Lint, so I guess you're running Eslint, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, great. Okay. So Eslint does what's called static analysis on your code. And static analysis is like everything that you can figure out about the code without actually running the code.
Okay.
So like, for example, if you consider prop types, which we took a look at, like React prop types, which we took a look at this week, prop types is designed to work when you're running your code. It actually checks that the values that you're passing in are of the type that you expect them to be. And you declare what type of values it expects, and then it checks the types of those values as you're running the code. Now, Eslint works in a different way because you run it like when you're not running the code. Like you can basically run it continuously, and it will integrate with your coding environment, like Visual Studio Code, and it can also check your code for errors. But the errors that it's able to check are a little bit different. So like, for example, it can do what's called lexical analysis. And basically, it can check to see, well, basically, it will tell you if the certain variables are undefined, or if you've potentially, like, say, if you've declared a constant variable using the const keyword, and then you attempt to assign to it again, like it'll detect that as an error. And so it's sort of like there's a whole class of errors that that can be detected through static analysis, which can be run just by reading the code. And you can take a look at the Eslint documentation to see, all of the stuff that it can pick out.
Awesome.
Yeah, there are extensions for Eslint, like plugins for Eslint, where which are specifically related to React and how React is used. You know, and they tend to, and they're also, and then it does other stuff too. So like it will also check your code to make sure that it's formatted correctly. And there are a couple of different like coding standards that it supports. Um, um, and so it will check and format your code to make sure that it's formatted correctly. This is helpful if you're working on a project with other people. If everybody is adhering to the same coding style, then it just makes the code cleaner and more consistent for everybody. So Eslint can help to it can help to enforce that. Yeah. So that's, yeah. So it'll, yeah, you can. So yeah, you can integrate it with VS Code. It supports Eslint. I don't think out of the box, but I think it's really easy to turn it on. I highly recommend that you do that. And you can also use it in your, you know, like if you add continuous, you know, if you add support for continuous integration to your project, which I highly recommend that you do, then you can also run it there. And you can also run it as a Git hook. So like before you commit any code to your project, you can add a Git Commit Hook, which, you know, forces you to run your Eslint first to make sure that it, you know, that the linter passes. Yeah, yeah. So, yep. Those are called Git Commit Hooks. I'll just post that. Yeah, there are a lot of different Git hooks that are available, which are just little scripts that you can run, which fit into your, you know, workflow whenever you're using Git. So you can do it like, you can run a command before you commit code. It can run a command before you are able to push any code to a server. There are, you know, and the reason for doing that is to make sure that yeah, that you're not committing broken or, you know, or code that doesn't pass linting. I think there's also a node module related to Git Commit Hooks, which is good because like that, like it will. I'll have to look that up. It's like a node module that sets up your Git commit hooks, and you can run it after you install your project, or after you run npm install on your project. And the reason why it does that is to, you know, basically enforce the coding standards that that are in your project. But I have to look that up. npm module. That's oh, there it is. That's a good question. How to install Git hooks on npm install. Oh yeah, okay. So it looks like they like this one. I'll put it in student resources.
Awesome.
So, Git commit hooks on npm install. Cool.
That's super neat.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely. That's really helpful. I'm going to check into this Git hooks thing because that's entirely new to me. So I will look at that. Thank you.
Yeah. I've definitely worked on projects where they used that technique. So when you'd install the project, it would install Git commit hooks, and those Git commit hooks would run lint and tests, and it wouldn't let you commit any code unless you had 100% test coverage.
Wow. Nice.
Yeah.
Not nice.
Well, very annoying, but I understand why I mean.
Right, like it sounds good in theory, but I'm sure in practice that was a lot to have to do.
Yeah, it's a delicate balance. Yeah. It made for a very robust, high-quality code base, but also one that was very slow-moving and couldn't change easily. So that's the balance. Well, does anybody have any other questions? Any thoughts that have come up? We've done about 2.5 hours of discussion. So if you have any questions that have arisen based on that discussion, we can chat about that.
Can I ask you a question that's actually not about testing?
Yes.
Okay. So I heard that you work as an independent contractor.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about what that's like? We haven't really had anyone come in and speak to us that, does freelance or independent contracting.
Sure. So I started contracting back in 2013. Yep, around 2013. And I think I incorporated my LLC in August of that year. The reason why I started contracting was for a couple of reasons. The first one was people were asking me if I was available to, consult or to, to do contracting on their project, stuff that might be, and there are different kinds of, clients who might, be more interested in engaging contractors than hiring employees. Some of those might be people who, companies in very early stages, where they don't necessarily have a payroll set up yet, but they need, some development work done to get an app off the ground. It might be, sort of medium-sized businesses that need sort of a, custom app developed for them, custom business application developed for them. But then after that, they don't necessarily, want to hire like a full-time software developer. They just want, you to work on like a project with a defined start and end period, and then maybe also do some maintenance services after that. And then it might be, larger companies that just, typically engage contractors or consultants because software is not a core part of their business, which, they rely on software, but software development is not one of their core, competencies. So there's a whole range of different possible clients. So anyway, I started doing it because people were asking if I was available to do it, and I was kind of interested in doing it because it seemed like it would potentially offer a little more flexibility in terms of my schedule and controlling my workload and things like that, which has not been, which is sometimes true and then sometimes it's not. Yeah, it's I'm trying to think about how to talk about managing clients. But anyway, so I started back in like 2013, and I've just been doing that ever since. I haven't been employed since then, and I've been working pretty consistently since then, except for when I've taken some sabbaticals. So I've been able to take a couple of sabbaticals in order to work on some open source and some research projects. So it's nice to be able to sort of control my workload that way. But usually when I'm consulting, I'm working a lot. So like right now I'm working a lot. So yeah, when you're working as a contractor or a consultant or a freelancer, these terms are all more or less interchangeable. There's a lot of like, there's some small business stuff that you have to do. You have to, worry about, or not worry about, but you have to deal with, potentially, if you've incorporated an entity like an LLC, then there's some regulatory stuff that you have to do around that. Usually not very much, but it depends on where you've incorporated your entity and the state that you're living in. So usually it's things like you have to pay a tax. Sometimes you might need to file a business tax return in the state where you're incorporated. You have to register, if you've incorporated outside of New York State, but you're operating in New York State, you have to, there's some regulatory stuff that you have to do to register as a foreign entity inside of New York State. If you have a lawyer, and you should definitely have a lawyer, they will be able to advise you on all the things that you have to do. But once you've got it set up, it's at least for, as a smaller entity, there's not really that much red tape or things that you have to maintain. It's very doable for me. Is like, like I have a single member LLC and no other employees. Sometimes I work with subcontractors, but not lately. There's not that much regulatory stuff that I have to deal with. It's more like something that I have to think about it like once a year. Your taxes are a little bit different. As a single member LLC, all the business income that comes through my business becomes like what's called pass-through income, and it just becomes like a regular income. So my taxes are not that different, but if I had an employee and I had to set up a payroll, or instead of having an LLC, I had a different kind of corporation, like an S corp or a C corp, then my taxes would become pretty different. So as you increase, the complexity of what you're doing, it can increase the complexity around, regulations and taxes and that type of stuff. But to just get set up with like a single member LLC, it's not very, it's not too much more complicated from a tax perspective for me. And then there's also potentially business insurance. So you might have to think about that. Some clients only will engage you as a contractor if you have a particular type of insurance. This is for them to limit their liability. So basically it's important when you're starting out to get hooked up with some people who can provide you with good services like legal and accounting services. That's another thing is like you'll need a bookkeeping service to keep track of your business expenses. I use a service called Bench. A lot of people use QuickBooks. So there's basically all this like small business stuff that you have to deal with that you wouldn't have to deal with it as an employee. And then there are things that you have to think about in terms of contract negotiation. Like every time you're onboarding a new client or starting a new project for a client, you sort of have to review contracts and think about the terms and write out schedules of work. And then you have to, you actually have to deal with cash flow stuff. So you have to, invoice clients, and they and manage that. They often will send send out checks, and then you have to sort of say, well, is the check in the mail? When's it going to arrive? Things like that. So there's less certainty in terms of more complexity and less certainty and around accounts receivable, or around getting paid. That's just part of the job as well. There are a lot of people who do this. In New York City in particular, there are a lot of people who work as contractors. There are advantages and disadvantages to that. As a contractor, you're outside of the company's org chart. You're not an employee, and that can be good because you're not necessarily competing with other people to rise in the ranks because there's nowhere to rise to, at least within an organization, a single organization. So that means that you, but at the same time, you're there to, provide as much value as possible to that organization. So you're in there it's a different perspective to have. These contracts don't necessarily last. Depending on the client, the contracts can last between 12 and 18 months is about how long they last for me now. So that means that you're going to be seeing a lot of different clients potentially. And it really depends on the projects, just what the requirements of those projects are. There may be stuff which is very short term and you have to build, some custom software in a couple of months. And then there might be longer term stuff. And it just, every situation is different. And let's see, what else? Health insurance is a big problem. I'm pretty lucky in that I'm on my my partner's health insurance. Because she's employed. But that's definitely still a concern. There used to be this thing in New York called the Freelancers Union. I mean, they still exist. They were offering health insurance plans to individual contractors, independent contractors, but even before Obamacare. That was pretty much why they were created. I mean, they're also an advocacy group. They advocate for the rights of independent contractors. But one of the big things that they used to do was they used to provide individual plans to contractors. And then after the ACA was passed, they started offering exchange plans, but they got out of the market a year or two ago. And I haven't been on an exchange plan for a couple of years now. I was for I think a year and a half, and it worked okay, but it was pretty expensive, and so that's not, and I'm not sure how good the markets, the individual markets are for that right now. But I've heard that if you have a company with more than one employee, like 2 employees, then you can opt into business health insurance. But I don't know how good that is. I haven't tested that yet. I think it's probably also going to be like very expensive. Health insurance is just like, it's just very expensive. So anyway, so that's an unsolved problem. What else can I tell you about that? Yeah.
Jake,
so,
I have a question.
Yeah, shoot.
How do you find new clients?
So it's word of mouth. Like they just kind of know me. Like everything I've done, all the clients I've worked with, have all come through referrals. And yeah, I just you know, it's that network. You know, it's that network of I mean, it's actually funny. So so the person who started to refer me to clients here in New York, who kind of opened the door to that, to doing consulting work in the city here. He actually he knew me from this open source project that I started during my master's. And I guess we had a conversation like 4 years ago in like 2010 or 2011 or something, which I do not remember. Like I don't remember talking to him back then. But then like 4 years later, he kind of remembered me, and then he reached out, and I was to see if I might be interested in interviewing for a consulting position in the city. So he just reached out to me on LinkedIn, and that kind of opened the door to doing more of this work in the city. I was consulting before that, but it was in Syracuse and some remote clients. But it's that type of thing, you know. It's just like you put your work out there, you know, you're active in the community, and people just kind of remember you, and they think about you when opportunities come up. So I don't advertise. My website looks really terrible. I haven't put any work or resources into that. But you know, it seems like enough people know my work that that they reach out to me when they have you know, when these opportunities open up. So I've been pretty lucky in that way. But I think that just comes from, you know, being active, you know, inactive software developer, you know, active in open source and doing hackathons a lot, and just you know, meeting people and talking to people, and you know, you just get to know people, and they get to know you. And yeah, because like I said, like before I started, I think a good indicator that you know, you might want to start consulting is if people are asking you if you're available to consult. If that keeps happening, then that's probably a good time to do it. But yeah, there are advantages and disadvantages to it, for sure. Anybody have any other questions about that?
Hi, actually, yeah, another question about that.
Yeah, shoot.
So, me over here. So, since you work on various different projects, you know, of course, different companies use different tech stacks. Are you just a master of multiple programming languages, or do you only accept projects in languages that you specialize in? Like, how does that work?
I will only accept projects that, so there's a particular tech stack that I'm, very fluent in. Prefer to work in scripting languages generally, so JavaScript and Python. But at the same time, I am, a competent developer in C, and I can kind of find my way around C++, and then some esoteric programming languages as well. So, and then I have a good background in just like Unix and systems programming, and then there's this. And then JavaScript is so like wide and varied that you can't know everything. So you have to be able to adapt to whatever, tech stack, because it's always going to be some weird custom thing that people have cobbled together. It's never just one thing. And so I'm a JavaScript expert is which I think is fair to say, or at least that's my area of specialization. So I have that area of specialization, and I'm also kind of a Unix guy. So those two things together, I basically do like JavaScript and Unix, but I also have like, a background is just a general computer science background and software engineering background. So that means that I'm sort of able to, adapt to other kinds of projects. But yeah, but there's a, but I typically don't like limit myself to a particular tech stack. Like even if there's something that I'm not, an expert in, I'll, people are willing to hire me and let me, use my best, I'll research it and I'll do my best to create something that works for them. And that's good because it's, it's a learning opportunity for me too. Yeah, like I had the opportunity to do some more development on a project in C++ recently. Had to use C++ and use some libraries that I'd never used before, and that was that was a good good experience overall, even though it wasn't my area of specialization. But yeah, the goal is to become like, there's like a set of tools in which I'm very fluent, and then I can sort of adapt those tools to solving a number of different problems. And I'm not able to solve every problem with these tools, and then I have to learn new skills and new tools, but having that set of tools available and just kind of having that in my wheelhouse. Because yeah, it's like learning a different language. You practice a lot and then you become fluent, and then you don't have to think about what you're doing as much. You just do it. You become more efficient. So that's useful, and that allows me to solve like different technical problems. But yeah, I don't limit myself to like one particular tech stack. Even though there is one particular tech stack that I'm kind of have reached, some level of mastery or expertise in.
What are some of your favorite like resources to go to when you're trying to figure out like problems that you may not know?
Well, it depends on the domain. I mean, Stack Overflow is all like Google, and Stack Overflow is always useful. If you can think about how to formulate the question, then a lot of the time you can find answers. And then I'm always reading Hacker News. Do you guys know Hacker News? News.ycombinator.com. That's usually a pretty good spot for hearing about new tech, technical projects and things like that. And then, you know, like sometimes you can get connected with people who are experts and then learn from them. That's really the best way to do it. Yeah, if you can find some people who are very good at what they do and then work with them and be able to ask them questions, that's a great way to learn. Because they can point you to other resources and then go from there. But yeah, it's an incremental approach. As long as you're like learning every day, learning and improving a little bit every day, then you're gonna grow in your skills. And fortunately, we live in a time where there are like almost unlimited resources, like free resources for learning about programming and computer science and a whole range of topics. Yeah, that the internet has really made those resources accessible. And yeah, I like to think of that as a democratizing force. I mean, I hope it makes it more, available and accessible for people to self-educate. Definitely for front-end development, there's just a ton of resources to learn about this stuff. Yeah, but I do less and less web development now. I'm more doing more work with data science type stuff, and that's an education for me. I'm learning a lot. But yeah, if anybody has thinks of any other questions, feel free to reach me on Slack, and then I'll make sure that I'm available on Sunday from 9 a.m. to noon. And yeah, feel free to reach out. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Hey, this was super helpful.
Great, I hope so. Glad to hear it. All right, thanks a lot, everybody.
Thanks, Jake.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Good night.